So, in one of the videos I did talking about Ken Penders being probably the most controversial writer in the history of Archie Sonic, you know, I mentioned a scenario in there that took place around the time he and Carl Bollers were kind of going back and forth as writers of the book. And one of those scenarios was the high school error. Now, I think I've mentioned this before, but the high school error, you know, as short lived as it was actually kind of significant because it basically, to me, whether or not you saw between the lines of what was really going on in the continuity of the story, basically, the high school error, kind of set up the fact, in my opinion, that the real person pulling the strings was Geoffrey St. John. And I know a lot of people never liked Geoffrey in the first place anyway, especially with a lot of the revelations that Penders came out about him post, Archie, post Penders' run on the Archie book, and everything. But we all know that Geoffrey St. John also had a thing for Sally, which of course coincides with people, especially not liking the character after Penders revealed what he had initially planned. But this little arc here, to me, was probably the best, under the radar evidence that Geoffrey St. John was only about himself. Because when the King Max got injured in battle, trying to retake Mobotropolis from Robotnik Mach 2, later known as Eggman, with Sonic and his son by his side, Elias, his son, who recently had come back, basically founded on the floating island along with his mom, Elias assumed control. Basically, by default, by being the oldest and everything, he assumed control of the throne temporarily until his father could get back on his feet. And what happened was, since he had a little bit of inexperience, Geoffrey St. John decided to offer his, his words of wisdom, if you will, to help out. Little did Elias know until later on that Geoffrey was only doing this and only in for it for himself. And there was a lot of decisions that got made, going back to the high school error part, I should say, not port, but error part. Easy for me to say. But anyway, going back to the high school error part, Geoffrey St. John, advised Elias to disband the Freedom Fighters, to put the Secret Service front and center as the ones to protect the kingdom and fight for the kingdom, and basically get Sonic and his friends to go back to school, basically go back and get an education. With the Freedom Fighters finding out, those that went back to school, that there was one missing, and that was Sally. Antoine, I think, was already of age, so he didn't have to go, but Sally, who was of that age of going back to school to get an education, they find out that she's not attending because at the behest of the royal family, mostly Geoffrey St. John, she's going to be homeschooled at the castle. Now, when you look at that, you're thinking, well, that doesn't make sense. I mean, she's still a teenager. She needs to have a public education. And if she's going to be a leader of the people down the line, she needs to be with the people. But again, this is all centered around the whole underlying story and evidence of Geoffrey St. John, doing this for himself. Another piece of evidence, too, is the fact that, well, basically, the Freedom Fighters were banned from leaving Knothole. So this led Sonic, along with Bunny's help, to go and fly around Robotropolis at night to see if there was anything, out of the ordinary, which they couldn't find or anything. But what's even more interesting is when Sonic goes to visit Sally, Geoffrey St. John asks him, "Do you have an appointment?" And Sonic's reaction is like, "No, but when has that stopped me before?" And Geoffrey just shuts the door on him, saying, "Oh, well, she is royalty after all." And again, you piece all this together. You piece everything that I just mentioned together, and it comes very evident to me and to anybody that Geoffrey St. John, in story, very underlining, if you will, was trying to set himself up to be the suitor of Sally, which would basically, fall in line with what Penders originally had planned. Now, I don't know how that was going to come to be if he had been able to do that, which thankfully he didn't, but still it kind of falls in line when you really think about it. Here you have Geoffrey St. John, advising, Elias, who's only temporary as king, to do this, to do that, things that don't seem right, things that seem out of the ordinary, and for what reason? For what reason, you wonder. Well, the reason's simple: to make himself look good in front of the royal family so they can look at him as a potential suitor for Sally. Because let's not forget, he's had feelings for Sally since he debuted, even though he's older than her by 4 or 5 years. Which, some people might say, oh, well, that doesn't stop people then and doesn't stop people now, so what's the difference? The difference, basically, is it's still looked at as an adult, trying to have a relationship with a minor. And in reality, that's kind of not right, if you know what I mean. It's kind of not, I guess you could say justifiable in any means, period. But, but basically, like I said, you can kind of tell that it almost coincides with what, Ken Penders probably had planned. Geoffrey doing all this stuff to basically make himself look good in front of the royal family to try to, get the blessing to be with Sally. But if you follow the book later on, you find out that everything came back to bite Geoffrey St. John, because not only was he leading his team into a scenario, a situation that they were not prepared for or experienced in, but basically caused them to get essentially almost killed, but put into a situation to where every now and then they had to basically be put into these tubes, these floating tubes, if you will, to be healed of whatever disease or affection, not affection, but infections, that they were suffering from, because of the fact that Geoffrey St. John wanted to prove himself to be better than Sonic, not realizing that he didn't need to do that, to try to win the hand of a princess, when pretty much he already had somebody who was in love with him from the start when she first saw him, and it only took him being alongside her, during that moment where they got that final, I guess you could say, treatment, they needed to be fully cured, fully cured, for him to realize, oh, I shouldn't have acted like the jerk I did, because I nearly put everybody's life in danger because I wanted to prove myself better, only to finally find out from Hershey, you didn't have to do that. You always were a hero. And oh, by the way, I've always had a thing for you, since the first day I met you and all that. So yeah, basically, when you really look at this whole storyline going on between, Penders and, the Penders running, the Bowlers running, and all that, it was, it was one of the, even though, like I said, the high score era part of it, the high score era plot point, or subplot, if you will, was not that long, it was still significant enough to showcase that this character, from a maybe unnoticeable but underlying situation in the continuity in the story, was basically just took advantage of a situation that he shouldn't have took advantage of. And that was trying to basically, get in good with the royal family, because he still had a thing for Sally and thought this was the best opportunity, until it backfired on him. Now, I know that may not make sense to a lot of folks watching this or listening to it, but when you really think about it, you look in between, it does kind of make sense. You kind of see how a lot of the little moments here and there that I've mentioned kind of interlock into one big, sensible piece. But let me know what your thoughts are, guys. Did you notice this as well as I do during that time frame? Notice the high score error? Let me know, and until next time, I'll talk to y'all later.